Like to call to order the meeting, and I would ask Mr. Conforti to lead us in the pledge.
I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, Mr. Conforti. May I have roll call, please?
Vice Mayor Harrington.
Present.
Councilmember Edwards.
Yes.
Councilmember Cook.
Here.
Councilmember Henley. Here. Mayor Agramonte.
Here.
Thank you.
I think we have already done a report on our closed session from earlier, so I don't have to do that. Could I have an approval of the agenda, please?
Make a motion to approve the agenda.
Second.
May I have a roll call, please?
Vice Mayor Harrington.
Aye.
Councilmember Edwards.
Yes.
Councilmember Cook.
Yeah. Aye.
Councilmember Henley.
Aye.
Mayor Agramonte.
Aye.
Thank you. The motion carries 5-0.
Thank you. So at this time, at this time, members of the public may comment on any item not appearing on the agenda. It is recommended that you keep your comments to 3 minutes or less under state law unless otherwise permitted under the Ralph M. Brown Act. The merits of the matters presented under this item cannot be discussed or acted upon by the city council at this time. And I just, when that little line, it's, sometimes we just stare at you and you want us to answer, and that's what that line means. This is your time, not ours, and we don't answer. For items appearing on the agenda, the public will be invited to make comments at the time the item comes up for council consideration. Upon being acknowledged by the mayor, please step to the podium and speak into the microphone. Begin by stating and spelling your name. Mr. Brown?
Thank you, Mayor. Ken Brown, BROWN, 1396 Lubeck Street in the beautiful city of Sonoma. I'm married to a jewel, so I understand the jewel connotation. I have an event this Friday at the community meeting room, formerly known as the Grange. It's called Jews, Blues, and Sufi. It's a jazz meets raga event. We've got some great performers. Earl Blue, 92 years old and still going strong. Sukawat Ali Khan, a Pakistani immigrant to America. Steve Shane. This Friday, August 10th, doors open at 7, music and dancing. There will be dancing, begins at 8 o'clock. Tickets are $10 in advance, $15 at the door. You could call me, Ken Brown, 938-8623 to get your tickets. This is an exquisite blend of improvised music of the spiritual East and the freedom of the jazz groove. Be prepared for a new open interpretation of a groovy nirvana. I like that word, nirvana. Be prepared to ohm and be verklempt. That's a good Yiddish word. Beer, wine, coffee, tea, healthy soft drinks, and cookies are available. We're doing this in conjunction with the Grange, and the Grange is 100% ADA compliant. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Brown.
Good evening. I'm Matthew Tipple. That's MATTHEWTIPPELL at 734 First Street West. I would be remiss in not wishing David a very happy and departure. So best of the rest of your life. So I want to be incredibly clear. I am a huge supporter of housing for all people. I have voted for affordable housing. I have built affordable housing. But I want to reiterate how important I think it is to have an item regarding taxes and solutions to taxes on an agenda that is in a time slot that is available to working folks. There's a whole lot of people here tonight that have shown up, I'm sure, for the next agenda item, but I think they would have benefited immensely from the discussions that you had. One of the things I wanted to clarify, that I'm hoping that you can clarify during the next, when you take this process forward, is what effect there will be on existing projects. What I mean is projects that have been deemed complete, that have approved tentative maps, and so I'd like for that to be considered, please. And the timing of the fees was also discussed. And
Well, you're really only supposed to talk about things that aren't on the agenda.
this is not on the agenda. It was. It was a previous meeting.
Technically, he's okay because the first meeting was a special meeting and now we're in the regular meeting.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
Hello, Ann Colachidas, Colichidas, 14 Hacienda, and today I'm here representing the Sonoma Valley Housing Group, and I know many of you sitting up there we've had the pleasure of hosting you at our Sunday morning meeting, and yesterday the Sonoma Valley Housing Group has endorsed Proposition 10, the Affordable Housing Act, repeal Costa-Hawkins. And we join some some other groups such as the California Nurses Association, CalFed, and also the California Democratic Party. So you can see there's a shift, a sea change in political will here to get this done, since this California Assembly, the legislature, couldn't get anything done this year. Our endorsement is part of an ongoing campaign we've had, probably starting here in 2015 when we declared a housing state of emergency. And also then last year, we had a Renters Week of Action in Sonoma and with a rally on the Sonoma Plaza. So this endorsement is just a natural progression of this ongoing campaign. And we urge this council to please get on board to endorse Proposition 10, so that you will finally be able to make some decisions about rental housing in Sonoma. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Logan Harvey, 578 Madera Drive. So I absolutely support the council endorsing Measure 10, and I'd like to. I'm going to read your Renters Week of Action proclamation to remind you of what you passed. So whereas the city of Sonoma is known for its small town charm, scenic beauty, and agricultural bounty, and whereas the city of Sonoma has long maintained its reputation as a diverse and welcoming place for families, small business owners, and seniors, whereas the city's housing element reflects these same values. Whereas the desirable qualities of Sonoma living are now known worldwide, attracting investment and speculation, which has resulted in soaring rents and dislocation of Sonoma natives and longtime residents alike. And whereas the housing supply has been created by private market, is primarily luxury housing, in part due to the decrease in funds for affordable housing, and whereas the confluence of these trends are duplicated throughout the San Francisco Greater Bay Area, leaving people in despair with no place to go and creating a housing crisis of epic proportion with no end in sight. Whereas renters' contributions to the city and economic life should be recognized, and whereas renters are active participants in the city to craft policies to ensure safe, healthy, and affordable housing, and whereas although it will take many years to build our way out of this housing shortage, the burden cannot be eased by withholding residential requirements for new projects, stronger renters' rights, possibly including fair rent, just cause evictions, and the imposition of additional fees on vacation rentals, vacant or rarely used residential properties. I'd like to point out also, I met a teacher the other day, and she was born and raised in this town, and her apartment. I actually knew another teacher who lived there previously and has since left this community, is now pursuing a different career and was pushed out largely due to rent. The rent maybe 10, 11 years ago was $900 a month, and it was just increased to $19.50 a month. And there are many people in this community that are important members of this community, first responders to this community, teachers in this community, and just general workers who deserve a place to live here, that are one rental rise away from leaving and being forced out of this community. And it's something this council should absolutely take seriously. And I believe that you all care about this a lot. And I'd like to see you take action on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Harvey.
Excuse me, I thought I was waiting for Ken. Fred Allebach, Fred Allebach, 19550 8th Street East, and with the Sonoma Valley Housing Group. And I would also encourage you to support Proposition 10 and repeal the Costa-Hawkins Act. I'm very proud to be associated with Ann in the Sonoma Valley Housing Group. She's somebody who's very active in the housing issues and in her particular segment of the manufactured homes housing situation here in the Valley. Somebody of some real stature who's made a big difference. And the people in the Sonoma Valley Housing Group really care about this. And so I'm really glad to just come up behind Ann and support that, because I know it's something that she's really working on. And there's serious housing squeeze on. Everybody knows it. It's in the news every day that middle class is like, 100 or low rent is $110,000 some dollars in San Francisco. So it's just really gotten outrageous, and renters need help. There's a big squeeze on. And so something needs to be done for help for renters. And so it would be a small symbolic gesture for the council to support Proposition 10 so that it would allow renters to have a little bit of a tool to keep their stake in the community. Sometimes I feel personally I've gotten more and more scared of being displaced. Who knows what would happen, but I feel like I'm a limpet on a rock on the beach. And so like when a wave comes on and displaces one of those little shells that is stuck on a rock, then you're gone. You're not going to be able to be attached again. So that's kind of the structural position that renters are up against here. And it's not only in the Bay Area, it's nationwide. And there was recently a map in the New York Times of the 2016 election that showed all the blue areas of the country and the red areas. And so the blue was basically all the big urban areas. And so it kind of struck me that these are areas that people want to live in because of the educational and cultural opportunities, but there's various boundaries and so there's almost kind of an immigration issue there too, of, get rid of the people, or people want in, they can't get in. And so these are renters. At the level of the United States, you have immigrants, undocumented immigrants, and in the blue areas you have renters. And so renters are in the threat of being displaced just because they can't stay in. So after having said all of that and wanting to support Ann and seeing that I've got 9 seconds left, I would encourage you to support Proposition 10. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Mr. Allebach.
Good evening. John Kyle, 14 Hacienda. I'm with Housing Now. And I'd like to add my voice to the chorus, asking this council to endorse Proposition 10, the Affordable Housing Act, that's coming up in November. For over 20 years after the passage of the Costa-Hawkins Act, we've relied on private industry and the marketplace to meet our housing needs, and they've failed us miserably. I don't think anybody in this room can disagree to that. For the last several years, we've turned to our state government to look at easing this crisis, and so far they've proved to be ineffective as well. With the Proposition 10, the Affordable Housing Act, in November, it's going to finally let us, that is our local communities, actually look at what we need right where we live and adjust our housing policies and our regulations to promote and to relieve the kind of pressure that is causing this housing crisis. And so, like I said, the act itself only gives the local governments that we all live in the latitude to employ a number of different tools to satisfy what the needs are in that community. It does not impose anything from above. It just unshackles us to be able to do what we need to do to solve the problem right here in Sonoma. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Kyle. So if I see no one rise to the podium, I think I'll close this public session. Where I wanted to ask this council, do we have any dedications? None? And I'm going to move forward now for a proclamation honoring Planning Director David Goodison on his retirement.
You're up there, Floyd.
Is that you, David?
Well, I have to say that until this afternoon, I literally did not know this was on the agenda. So,
It's our thrill to surprise you. City of Sonoma proclamation honoring Planning Director David Goodison on his retirement August 6, 2018. Whereas on April 29, 1985, the City of Sonoma was fortunate enough to hire a 24-year-old young man named David Goodison as a part-time intern at the Planning Department. But David, I need to cut in here because you explained to us that when you first walked into the building, Eleanor Berto thought you were the printer,
the
copier repairman. So she took you by the arm and led you to the copier.
It still doesn't work.
Whereas David was hired full-time as an assistant planner in 1988, associate planner in 91, and became the planning director in 2000. And whereas David was a 2002 graduate of the Popular Leadership Sonoma Valley program, which is designed to identify, train, and motivate the finest current and future leaders from all business segments, and to prepare them for community involvement. And whereas he has built strong relationships with many community partners, including the Sonoma Community Center, for whom he served as board member for several years. And whereas David has supported the city's historical preservation and climate action policies and initiatives. And whereas David was instrumental in the completion of many projects, including the general plan updates, the City of Sonoma Traffic Calming and Pedestrian Improvement Program, and numerous residential and commercial projects all over Sonoma. And whereas David's expertise and consistent high work ethic has been recognized on numerous occasions, whether a letter to the Sonoma Index Tribune editor for his make it work attitude, or 1996 Award of Merit for Comprehensive Planning for the Sonoma General Plan. And whereas David has been an integral member of the city's management team, often offering a depth of institutional knowledge, often with a sense of humor and grounded perspective. And whereas he has always stepped forward to assist on special projects with positive energy and initiative. And whereas during the October 2017 fires, David worked endless hours to support the city's emergency efforts. And whereas David will be incredibly missed by all. Therefore, be it proclaimed, I, Mayor Madeline Agramani, on behalf of the City Council and the City of Sonoma, along with the city staff and residents, wish David Goodison the very best in his retirement, and with deep gratitude, thank him for his vital services and his exemplary dedication to the Sonoma community for over 33 years. In witness whereof, I hereunto set my hand and caused the seal of the city of Sonoma to be affixed this 6th day of August 2018. Thank you so much, David. Would you like to say a few words?
I'll keep it short. That was extraordinarily kind, and I truly appreciate it. And it's really just a long way of saying that I'm a very fortunate person. I've been very fortunate to be in this community. I've been very fortunate to have the job that I've had. I've been very fortunate to work with the people that I've worked with in the public, on the staff, and on the city council. I really couldn't be luckier, and I'm really fortunate that I've found someone in my life to move on to a new realm or a new page in my life. And so I just want to thank you all so much. And in terms of all of the projects that you've mentioned, I'll just say that the best things I've ever done are any affordable housing project and the Montini Preserve. And again, I'm just grateful to have had the opportunity to work with a lot of people on all of those projects. And lastly, I just want to say that through the years, I've just worked with some fantastic people on city staff, and that's as true today, if not more so, than it ever has been. It's a fantastic group of people, and it's just a great pleasure to be part of that team. And similarly with city councils, we have a strong, a forward-looking city council, and I admire and appreciate all of you. So thanks again.
Thank you, David. So I think, David, you look very, very young. I think you're going off to Palo Alto or something to work. I'm not sure, but I know they have good employee packages. Thank you so much, David. So our city clerk.
Just, Mayor Agramonte, before we start the consent calendar, I would like to pull 4.4 of the TOT, just so I can do a brief update to the public and have you vote on that separately.
All right, thank you.
All items listed on the consent calendar are considered to be routine and will be acted upon by single motion. There will be no separate discussion on these items unless members of the council, staff, or public request specific items to be removed for separate action. At this time, the council may decide to change the order of the agenda with item 4.4 pulled for separate consideration.
So I understand, City Manager, it's, what number is it? I'm sorry.
4.4, the city's TOT.
Oh, right.
Revenue
And
measure.
would anyone else like to pull anything or change the order? If not, could I have a motion? Comment? Yeah. Oops. I see Fred. I'll take it out to the public for comments. Oh, no. So what I'm asking the public, of course, is if you want to take anything out of order. I think our city manager asked to take 4.4 out of order. So there is no request from the public. I'll bring it back. And what's the pleasure?
I'd like to make a motion to approve 4.1, 4.2, and 4.3 on the consent calendar.
Second.
May I have a roll call, please?
Vice Mayor Harrington?
Aye.
Councilmember Edwards?
Yes.
Councilmember Cook?
Aye.
Councilmember Henley?
Aye.
Mayor Agramonte?
Aye.
Motion carries unanimously.
I'm so sorry. I know I can't do this, but if you could remember Mrs. Capriola, there was a question about, I think Mr. Tipple, but he left, about senior housing. And if you might, could you just draw their attention to the website that has that vintage project on it? And it's a senior project, am I right? So I apologize. I made a note here and didn't get back to it.
So on the city's webpage, we have we have a location called development projects, and any current development project, large scale, is listed there. So members of the public can get updates. There is a vintage park project, which is I'm going to turn to David because he is more intimate, describe. It is a senior complex. So let me have him describe it.
Well, it has two components. It has a senior care facility and also 27 senior apartment units.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And at this point, are you moving forward, Mrs. Capriola, or do we go out to the public?
I'd like to give just a brief update. So as council knows, on July 23rd, council adopted a resolution to put before the voters an increase in our transient occupancy tax. This is our hotel tax, to place that on the November 2018 election. So council discussed it, and the item and the direction from council was to put before the voters to increase the TOT by 2% that would become effective January 1, 2019, and giving council the authority for an additional 1% that could occur basically in the next 5 years. So when we turn that ballot language and the resolution, the ordinance, into the register of voters, they contacted us back and said they really felt that the ballot language should contain language that communicated the duration of the transient occupancy tax. And so after conversations back and forth with legal, while we weren't necessarily sure it was required to be super safe, it just makes sense to do it. So basically we are adding a word, just the word ongoing, to the ballot language that will be before the voters to provide that clarity. And so that is the reason that is before you. And so I'm asking council, and the reason I pulled it because council was unanimous in their support of this. So this is really what I would call technical clarification required by the register of voters, but I thought it was important to be able to communicate that publicly. And so we're asking you to withdraw and rescind your resolution 50/2018 and adopt same resolution except adding the word ongoing to the ballot language, and also instead of just Sonoma, the ballot language will say City of Sonoma for additional clarification, and otherwise the rest of the language remains the same. So be happy to answer any questions, and that was the reason for the change.
There is a resolution connected to that.
Right, you will need to take two actions. You'll need to adopt a resolution to withdraw your prior action and then adopt a new resolution, and that's the cleanest way legislatively for us to do this.
Page 4 is the resolution. Oh, sorry. Page 4 is the first resolution that you were speaking of.
Correct. So if you go to public comment, unless there's any questions from the council.
Would someone like to make a motion? Sorry. Out for public comment.
Good evening, Council. Larry Barnett, 637 5th Street East, Sonoma. During your previous special meeting, Councilman Edwards misspoke and commented that the TOT was going to be going to 15%. I want to point out that error. The TOT is going not to 15%. The TOT that you're increasing is going to 12% from 10%, with a possible 1% increase. And in addition to that, there is 2% continuing to go to the TID. That equals 15%, but that does not equal the TOT going to 15%. I point this out because I continue to feel, and I made this point at the previous meeting where you had discussed this, that the city is being too timid about its TOT increase. I believe you should increase the TOT not by 2% and 1% in the future at some point in the next 5 years, but you should increase it to 14% from 10% right now. The TOT as it stands at 10% has not changed in decades. You have some ground to make up. You have lost an opportunity to generate additional revenues for the city that other cities have taken. Now, the only city that I know of that's done what I'm proposing is the city of Healdsburg. But I don't think Healdsburg has anything on Sonoma. I think if Healdsburg can absorb a TOT, a true TOT, not TOT plus TID, but a TOT of 14%, so can the city of Sonoma. And tonight you have the chance to change the language in this resolution to a higher number. We're talking about significant money here. 2% on TOT brings in another $750,000 a year. Immediately, we're talking about, instead of the city realizing $750,000 in the fiscal year, I suppose would be 2019, you could have $1.5 million. Now, I don't understand, given the pension crisis you're facing, the possible exposure on water issues, and the other expenses that the city manager has delineated for you as to the challenges financial for the city, why you would be so reluctant to essentially put in place what I feel for the citizens of Sonoma is a painless tax. This is a tax that's paid by visitors to Sonoma. Keep in mind, the actual amount of an increase on a room is tiny. It's incidental. It's $5, maybe $10. You can't think of it just in terms of percentages. The actual impact on the bill of the person who stays here is going to vary, but it's a very small amount. And having been in the hotel business for 13 years, it was never an issue for me. So I would remind you that this is an opportunity to change your plans, move it up to a full 14%. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Barnett. Not seeing anyone. Anyone else would like to speak on this issue? Seeing none, I'm closing public comments, and I'm bringing it back to the City Council if you have any questions. Or is somebody late to the... Well, you know what? You can come up and speak if that's what you wish. I think it's kind of a fast place. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. I know there's going to be
So
a
I'm
long
going to open the public session.
Good. I know it's going to be a long meeting tonight, so I'll be quick. Logan Harvey, 578 Esmadera Drive. I'd like to echo Larry's comments and also point out that there was a discussion earlier tonight about creating incentives for people to develop here and to develop affordable housing projects, and the possibility of creating an affordable housing trust fund or a fund. And TOT is a perfect target for that. If we could capture 2% of TOT, you're talking about $750,000 that could be used for an affordable housing trust. That's real money, and that's money that you could give to a developer to develop a project, to make a project pencil, to allow for a project that would be 60% affordable rather than 20% affordable, which is what we're looking at with the project tonight, and with other projects that's the only requirement that we have is 20% inclusionary. So raising TOT, again, gives the city options to incentive positive development that would actually benefit the workforce in Sonoma. And I think it's something that's definitely worth considering. If you go 2 or 3, that's good too, but 4 I think is solid as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Harvey. Is there anyone else who would like to step forward? Seeing none, I'm going to close the public session, and what's the pleasure of this council?
I make a motion to adopt a resolution rescinding withdrawing resolution 50-2018. Can we do them both at once? Okay.
I'll second that.
Roll call, please.
Vice Mayor Harrington?
Aye.
Councilmember Edwards?
Yes.
Councilmember Cook?
Aye.
Councilmember Henley?
Aye.
Mayor Agramonte?
Aye.
Thank you. The motion carries unanimously.
So the next order of business, with respect to, if you would like to explain that for us again, City.
So the next resolution is to adopt the resolution proposing the transient occupancy tax increase.
I'd like to make a motion to approve a resolution of the City Council of the City of Sonoma proposing an increase in the transient occupancy tax. Do I have to read the whole thing? I will.
I think you can say as proposed and written in the staff report.
As proposed in the staff report.
Second.
Roll call, please.
Vice Mayor Harrington?
Aye.
Councilmember Edwards?
Yes.
Councilmember Cook?
Aye.
Councilmember Henley?
Aye.
Mayor Agramonte?
Aye.
Thank you. The motion carries unanimously.
Thank you, Council.
If that being said, Madam Mayor, if you're ready for the next item.
Thank you.
Item 6.1, discussion, direction, and possible action on the request from Sonoma Valley Art Museum for city support for special October Fire Love installation on Plaza Horseshoe Lawn.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes.
Thank you, Mayor Agramonte, council members, members of the public. So pleased here today to talk about another opportunity for the city to continue its partnership with the Sonoma Valley Art Museum. As you know, we've had some lovely art on the plaza for the last 2 years. And the Sonoma Valley Art Museum is looking at a special exhibit focused on artists and art from the fires. And as part of this, they have an opportunity to bring a sculpture from Ms. Laura Kimpton. It's called what I'm informally calling a love sculpture. The sculpture, the request from the Art Museum is to see if the city would be willing to place it on the horseshoe as part of really from September through December. The sculpture is about 6 feet tall and 20 feet wide. It comes with kind of inside lighting, so it can be lit different colors. And as council knows, last year as we went through the recognition and appreciation ceremony after the fires, the theme the city chose was the Love in the Air theme. And so we had our Love in the Air heart in front of City Hall. And this is an idea brought by the museum that would have a different kind of feature and sculpture in front of this horseshoe. And we have talked about different ways to install it to minimize the impact on the grass and some of that as well. So the request for you tonight, and Linda Keaton is here to speak to you as the executive director and answer any of your questions. But there is looking for a resolution, your approval to approve the installation, authorize the city manager to waive any fees and work with the art museum on the best installation for both safety, security, and to minimize the impact on the lawn. Condition that the art museum would repair the lawn or any damage, and authorize the lighting of the sculpture at night, and then authorize myself to execute any contracts and take any other actions necessary to implement this temporary installation. So if it's a pleasure of the council, I would ask Ms. Keaton maybe to come forward and speak, and then she can answer any questions you may have as well.
First off, I want to thank the council for considering this matter. And I want to thank city staff for moving with great agility on this. This was a concept that came together very quickly. The museum was very moved, as we all were, by the community's response during the fires and then the resilience of the community after the fires. And as we were thinking about how to commemorate, how to have a community celebration, honoring our solidarity during the fires, we started working on an exhibition concept called From Fire, Love Rises. And these are shared stories from the artist community. And we've been very fortunate to engage some really wonderful and collaborative artists during this process. And one of them was Laura Kimpton. She will have a piece inside the museum, and she came to us and offered to actually ship her love sculpture, which is now in Fire Island. She's going to ship it in September, and she offered to install it in the horseshoe in memory of the fires and the community's response. So we're very pleased to bring this proposition to the council, and we hope that you will consider it.
Thank you so much.
And Mayor Council, just one other thing I would add that part of what the museum did also was reach out to the Sonoma Valley Visitors Bureau, as that you know that they do the annual lighting in the plaza. And so the question really was how would that interface, and they've talked to, and they've looked at it and were supportive and thought it would be a nice addition. So there's not there's no issue there.
Thank you. Rick, do you have a?
I have a couple questions. One, so you are having an exhibit at the museum. What's the dates of that exhibit going to be?
It opens September 28th, and it will run through January 6th or 7th.
Okay. And the other question is, I believe Paradise Ridge Winery in Santa Rosa
Right.
that had fire damage. They didn't have this version, but they had a bigger version. Is
They
this
had
one the same size or a little bit smaller?
It's a little bit smaller, but it's the same artist, and that was the inspiration for the Love in the Air.
Awesome. And it's been to Burning Man, which I've been wanting a Burning Man sculpture for a long time.
Right.
Not this one, the big one did.
Right.
Are there any questions from the council or staff?
Can you just remind, not that there's too much art, but can you just remind me when the other pieces are going to be removed?
They will be removed mid-October. Is that right, Tanya? Yeah. We have our exhibitions manager, Tanya Gayer, here.
They've been great, by the way, also.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
I think the children love the deer.
That would be an understatement.
They're all over them.
Right.
For you to make any comments regarding this? Seeing no one rise and approach the podium, I will close that public session. Oh my God. You think I'm old, I'm not. I'm going to open this session again.
I believe there are several of us here tonight.
Okay, great.
Ken Stokes, 480 and 488 Brazil Street. I'm a longtime member of the museum. I joined the board earlier this year. I'm just here to speak in support of two things. One is to thank you for your strong working relationship with the museum and your appreciation of the current exhibit in the park. And two, to add my voice to what I believe will be a chorus of voices for your approval of the item under consideration. Thank you.
Mr. Stokes, I'm sorry.
Stokes.
Thank you.
Hi, Lynn Joyner, 254 West MacArthur Street, Sonoma. I'm just coming up here because I love the deer and I'm not a little kid anymore. But I would like to plant a seed and see if you folks would like to try to keep them there permanently. And I think that would be wonderful if we could maybe cut back on the number of bands at the city party next year, which was great this year, but use some of that money along with some private contributions and keep those deer. They belong there. Thank you.
Suzanne Brangham, 473 2nd Street East. I'm here in total support and feel that this is yet another phenomenal contribution to the city with regard to public art. Everyone that has come forward has been so successful and loved by adults and children. This sculpture, LOVE, not only commemorates a year in October of the fires that we had and the love that was generated at that time. Secondly, it runs through the holiday season and the love shining on the plaza once again. Hopefully, and I'm sure people will recognize the need for gifting at that point for all of those who have suffered. And thirdly, I love the fact it's in front of City Hall, because residing in City Hall for 33 years was David Goodison, and that love sculpture will remind us that we loved having him there for all of those years.
Yay.
Veronica Naples, 18092 Gregor Street. I would like to thank the City of Sonoma for their support of the arts through these public displays of sculpture and art, and also for the council for the same support, and the Sonoma Valley Museum of Art. I think this is going to be spectacular, and it just makes me so happy to see everyone interacting in the plaza with all of the art. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Is there anyone else who would like to share their thoughts? If not, I am going to close this public comment section. And going back to the council for discussion.
So I love the idea, and I would love to see even a wooden love sign at Depot Park as well. So just for fun. So I'm going to be fully supporting this.
I think there are 3 things, is that right? Or they can be taken all at once?
They're all within the resolution. So if you approve the resolution, then the items I listed are
that's
included in the
page 6.
resolution.
I have a question. When do the holiday lights get installed, and when do we have a date for the lighting of the plaza?
I apologize, I don't have that date. I can look it up probably, but generally it's kind of the third week in November, and that goes through the first few days, maybe the first week in January.
And then related to Gary's suggestion, I do know that she makes little loves, so I don't know if she has one laying around for Depot Park, if we didn't want Depot Park to be left out. I definitely support this. The end date, part of me thinks that having a few weeks of holiday lights without something in front of City Hall, I think people would appreciate. One thing I don't want to do is for having so many things on the plaza, then people stop being supportive of having it.
Mm-hmm.
But so that I'm open to. The people I've talked to, nobody seems to mind, and I think it will look really beautiful with the lights. And maybe 1 year with something in front of the lights would be a nice change.
Oh, I just wanted to, in addition to all the things that have been said, compliment the city. I think rarely do we have a program that sort of just happens and it turns out great, and there's like 95%, 98% positive feedback, and that the following year it just gets better and better. And that I feel like that kind of happened with public art, especially since Kathy got here, and I really enjoy it. I think it's wonderful for our whole town. So I definitely support this, and I hope we keep doing it. And it's great. What a great win for all of us.
Yeah, I just thank you, but it's definitely a team effort. There's the Cultural and Fine Arts, there's council's leadership of being willing to take a bit of a risk. We hadn't done this as a community. The Art Museum, Lisa Jansen, Rebecca, so it's a team effort, and it's great to be able to bring something and have that change over and create some fun interaction on our plaza.
David?
I will also be supporting this tonight. I want to thank you because we have a lot of members from the museum. The insulation at the plaza is beautiful. My 4 children love it. They're not climbing on it because my twins are only 1 year old on Wednesday. But I just wanted to thank you before I made this resolution. I would like to make a resolution of the City Council of the City of Sonoma approving the installation of a love sculpture in partnership with the Sonoma Valley Museum of Art to commemorate the anniversary of the October 2017 fires in the plaza.
I'll second that.
May I have a roll call, please?
Vice Mayor Harrington?
Aye.
Councilmember Edwards?
Yes.
Councilmember Cook?
Aye.
Councilmember Henley?
Aye.
Mayor Agramonte?
Aye.
The motion carries unanimously.
So our city clerk?
Moving into item 6.2, review, discussion, and possible action to uphold or deny an appeal of the Planning Commission's approval and possibly approve 1, a mitigated negative declaration, 2, a tentative map and use permit for the Gateway Mixed Use Development at 870 Broadway.
And just briefly, Mayor Agramonte and council members, before Mr. Goodison starts, I do think there are some materials that came in today that council literally got and you may not have had a chance to read. I guess my recommendation is two ways. It's a pleasure of council, but it does make sense to probably take a 5 or a 10-minute break. Make sure that before you start asking questions, deliberation. So if you want to take that break now and give yourselves a few minutes to read some of the things that literally came in today, or if you'd like Mr. Goodison to do his presentation first and then take a break. But I want to make sure that the council has time to make sure that you've read some of the last correspondence. So I look for the pleasure of the council.
10 minutes? Okay, we'll do that now. Thank you.
So we'll take a 10-minute break and let you, do you want to break, council? So members of the public, I'm just curious. Okay, so 10-minute break. Okay.
I believe we have we already heard from you, Mrs. Capriola, regarding.
Yes, so at this point, we will, if council is ready, having had a chance to read correspondence, and we will move to David Goodison, our planning director.
Thank you, Mayor Agramonte and members of the City Council. Before beginning with the staff report, I wanted to just outline the appeal process, which is following a standard format. First, there's going to be a staff report. That will be followed by an opportunity for questions from the City Council. After that, the public hearing will be opened. The appellants will have up to 20 minutes to present, and then that too would be followed by an opportunity for council questions. The applicants would then have a 20-minute presentation opportunity, followed by an opportunity for council questions. And then public comments would follow with, again, under just the council standard protocol, comments typically being limited to 3 minutes. After the close of the public hearing, the council will deliberate and provide direction on the issues raised in the appeal. So that's the process that we'll be following tonight. All right, now to begin with the item. So I'd like to just start off by talking about the subject property a little bit, although I know that we're all pretty familiar with it. It's a 1.86 acre site located at the corner of Broadway and MacArthur Street. It's been used for auto sales, rentals, and repairs since 1925, but that use closed in 2011. Development on the property today consists of a 6,000 square foot showroom, a 3,000 square foot building with the appearance of a barn that has been used for storage and as an automotive paint shop, and a wood frame garage building. Large portions of the site have been paved for use as vehicle display areas and storage. And so here's a closer look at the property, and this slide shows it at least in 2011 or possibly earlier, because it shows how the property was used as a auto sales and rental area, and that also included an opportunity for truck rentals. And you can see vehicles parked in the creek setback at the corner of the property. Adjoining uses include a mixed-use development to the north. To the south, across MacArthur, is the MacArthur Place Hotel. To the east, there is a duplex and a city-owned open space preserve. And to the west, across Broadway, there's an apartment development and commercial uses. This property has a general plan designation of mixed use and a corresponding mixed-use zoning designation. In addition, this site is located within the historic overlay zone, and the northeast corner of the property lies within a creek setback area associated with Nathanson Creek. The project review timeline is on the screen right now, but before I get into that, I would just like to note that prior to the submittal of this application, the Planning Commission held a series of study sessions over the course of 2014 and 2016, in which a variety of development concepts proposed for the site were reviewed. For example, in October and November of 2014, the Planning Commission conducted study sessions on a mixed-use proposal addressing both the subject property and the property across the street at 899 Broadway. That development concept envisioned a 36-room hotel, a food-oriented commercial component, 15 apartment units, and on-site parking, along with an off-site parking lot at 899 Broadway operated by a valet service. There were a lot of concerns about that proposal in terms of parking adequacy and traffic impacts, and so in response, a revised alternative was presented to the Planning Commission in which the hotel component was eliminated, and the 870 Broadway site would have been developed with 20 townhomes and an expanded culinary promenade, along with 7 live-work units. The 899 Broadway site would have been redeveloped with 10 townhomes and a small retail space. That proposal, too, provoked significant concerns regarding building mass, intensity of use, parking adequacy, and conformance with the design guidelines for the Broadway corridor, and it was ultimately withdrawn. Subsequently, the property owner brought in a different development team, this time with a focus on a purely residential proposal featuring 22 to 30 multifamily residences. 3 iterations of this concept were reviewed by the Planning Commission over the course of 2014-2015, but it too was ultimately dropped because many planning commissioners felt that the mix of unit sizes was overly weighted towards larger units, and several members of the Planning Commission expressed their preference for a project having a commercial component. While none of these concepts proceeded to the application phase, the directions from the Planning Commission that emerged from those study sessions were used to guide and inform the components of the current proposal. So that brings us to the project that's under review right now. An application for this project was filed last August. It was subsequently determined by staff that the project was subject to environmental review pursuant to CEQA. Various studies were commissioned and a draft expanded initial study was prepared and circulated for review. While that was happening, a Planning Commission study session was held in September of 2017 when the project as originally proposed was reviewed by the Planning Commission in a study session format. The project returned to the Planning Commission in March of this year following the completion of the initial study and the conclusion of the comment period. So that's when the Planning Commission began in earnest to review the environmental issues associated with the project and revisions to the site plan that came out of the study session comments. No action was taken at the March meeting. The Planning Commission simply provided direction on some issues that it had and changes that it wished to see. So the project returned to the Planning Commission in May of this year. At that time, the Planning Commission reviewed a revised project that included revisions that were based on comments made in the March hearing. And ultimately, the Planning Commission voted 5-2 on separate motions to adopt a mitigated negative declaration and to approve the use permit and tentative map. And then following that approval, the decisions of the Planning Commission were appealed to the City Council, which brings us to our hearing tonight. This slide shows the original proposal, which called for the redevelopment of the site with a mixed-use development featuring 39 multifamily residences. This project would have required a density bonus and a 4,100 square foot commercial space. The mixed-use building that's placed at the southeast corner of the site aligned with Broadway. The lower floor featured commercial space and 10 one-bedroom apartments were proposed on a second floor. This building was proposed with a height of 33 feet 9 inches. The remaining 29 residences were proposed to be townhomes. These were grouped in clusters wrapping around the mixed-use building. All were proposed as 3-story structures with a height of 35 feet. At the northeast corner of the site, which lies within a creek setback, the site plan retains that area and would preserve it as a common open space area. Unit sizes range from 486 square feet to 1,458 square feet. So again, that's the first iteration. In this proposal, 2 main access driveways were proposed, one on Broadway and one on East MacArthur Street, along with a secondary emergency vehicle access on East MacArthur Street. Total of 93 parking spaces were proposed under this concept. The next iteration of the project, which was reviewed by the Planning Commission in March, modified the circulation plan by eliminating the driveway connection to Broadway. And so under this proposal, access would be from a connection off of East MacArthur Street at the eastern side of the site with a secondary emergency-only connection also on East MacArthur Street, but closer to the intersection. So in this proposal, the mixed-use building was streamlined. Its height was reduced to 30 feet. The heights of the apartment units fronting Broadway were reduced. In this proposal, instead of apartments above the commercial building, there are 4 condominium flats. The number of residential units was decreased, and the mix of units was altered somewhat. Overall, the revised site plan improved the project in terms of how it addressed Broadway and East MacArthur Street. In addition, vehicle circulation was simplified and the pedestrian circulation and amenities were strengthened. But again, the Planning Commission took no action on this iteration of the project because one of the townhome units encroached into the Nathanson Creek floodway, which could not be allowed without a detailed engineering report and associated findings. However, the commissioners did provide feedback on the proposal and requested some additional information, including a context map. And then that takes us to the May 10th site plan that was reviewed by the Planning Commission. Some of the changes are summarized on this slide. 2 townhome units were eliminated. The size of the commercial component was reduced by 600 square feet. The porch of that building now wraps around on the north. All structures removed from the floodway. The apartment units are functionally oriented towards Broadway with porches and front doors facing the street. An uncovered parking space was added, and the project driveway provides a clear separation from the adjoining driveway on the east on East MacArthur Street, including a landscape buffer. This is the iteration of the project that was approved by the Planning Commission, again on votes of 5-2 on separate motions. First, to adopt findings and a negative declaration, and second, to approve the tentative map and use permit subject to conditions. And in these slides, we see different renderings and perspectives of the project, including from the corner of Broadway and MacArthur, from East MacArthur Street. These are interior buildings. And these show the transitions of the project on Broadway and on East MacArthur Street in terms of how it relates to adjoining structures. And then lastly, here are some streetscapes of the project with the MacArthur frontage on the top of the slide and the Broadway frontage below. This slide shows the distribution of unit types and sizes. The 8 apartments have a living area of 486 square feet. The 4 flats are at 1,275 square feet. Only 5 of the units exceed 1,500 square feet, and none exceed 2,000 square feet. And perhaps an easier way to look at it is in a chart form. So again, almost 2/3 of the units are between 1,000 and 1,500 square feet, 24% less than 1,000 square feet, and 15% between 1,500 and 2,000 square feet. And then we see the bedroom mix as well. This project features 1 bedroom, 2 bedroom, 3 bedroom, and 4 bedroom unit types. And it's also interesting to compare this project to previous study session proposals. The 2015 proposal in particular, being the most recent, was a 100% residential concept, and in that proposal there were a number of variations, but all of those variations included units of greater than 2,000 square feet in area, and all of them also included variations of 2,500 square feet in area. One of the key directions of the Planning Commission was to reduce unit sizes in this project, and they succeeded. This slide summarizes the project in terms of the standards of the Development Code. The property again is in the has a zoning designation of mixed use and is set forth in that in the Development Code. That designation is intended to provide for higher density housing types such as apartments and condominiums, both separately and in conjunction with commercial and office development, in order to increase housing opportunities, reduce dependence on the automobile, and provide a pedestrian presence in commercial areas. Absent a density bonus, the maximum residential density is 20 units per acre, which equates to 37 units based on the size of the property. In this project, we have a mix of apartments, flats, townhomes, and 3 detached structures, along with the 3,500 square foot commercial component, all of which uses are allowed subject to use permit review. And so to summarize the standards, the building setbacks are met in this project. Floor area ratio is met in this project. Site coverage, the most stringent definition of site coverage in the Development Code, is met in this project. Open space is exceeded. Maximum roof height allowance in the Development Code is 30 to 36 feet. in the project is approved at the Planning Commission. The roof ridge heights are 25 to 35 feet. Parking, the total number of parking stalls required for this mix of uses is 74, and that's met in this project along with 2 apron spaces. Parking is an appeal issue, as is maximum roof height, so we'll get into that in more detail later on in the presentation, along with the discussion of just the uses and how they relate to the development code and the general plan. Well, I don't have a slide for it. Before I move on to the environmental review component, I would like to just note that a very thorough analysis was conducted by staff with respect to the consistency of this project with various goals, policies, and implementation measures of the general plan. This project complies, and I think that that is pretty well laid out in the staff report, but just to highlight some of the key policies: encourage a variety of unit types in residential projects, promote higher density infill development while ensuring that building mass, scale, and form are compatible with neighbor and town character, encourage diversity in the type, size, price, and tenure of residential development in Sonoma while maintaining quality of life, support flexibility and variety in site planning, housing design, ownership, and living arrangements, protect and where necessary enhance riparian corridors, require development to avoid potential impacts to wildlife habitat, air quality, and other significant biological resources, to incorporate bicycle facilities and amenities in new development, encourage a mix of use at higher densities, encourage shared and park once parking arrangements, require developments to be designed and constructed in a manner that reduces the potential for injury caused by flooding and other types of natural hazards, and achieve compliance with the city's noise standards. The project complies with all of those general plan policies. Several appeal issues are directed at the question of whether the potential environmental impacts of the project have been adequately evaluated. And that question relates to the environmental review process, which is regulated by the California Environmental Quality Act, also known as CEQA. With respect to this process or this law, CEQA is the state's primary environmental protection law. It requires that public agencies analyze and disclose potential impacts of a project on the physical environment, and it does not dictate, the outcome of that analysis does not dictate project approval or denial. In this project, an initial study was prepared, and as part of that evaluation, studies were commissioned addressing a variety of issues, including traffic and noise. This slide summarizes all of the different issues that are addressed in the initial study, as well as the impact conclusions. In the areas of air quality, biological resources, cultural resources, hydrology and water quality, noise, transportation and traffic, and utilities and service systems, potentially significant impacts were identified. But mitigation measures were also identified that would reduce all of those potential impacts to a less than significant level. No unavoidable significant impacts were identified through the initial study process. Appeal issues. So these are grouped somewhat differently in this presentation than in the staff report. I've tried to organize them kind of around some common themes in order to basically speed up my staff report. So some of the key appeal issues have to do with aesthetics, especially having to do with view impacts under CEQA, and also a potential impact on what's known as the Broadway Street Historic District. So one of the appeal allegations is that the project is inconsistent with CEQA thresholds having to do with the protection of scenic vistas, and also having to do with ensuring that new development doesn't significantly degrade the visual quality of its surroundings. So those are the CEQA thresholds that are at play. Now, there might be other kinds of design review, design guidelines that the City Council will consider in the course of this project, but right now I'm just focusing on the CEQA question. So with respect to that issue, the factors used in the initial study to evaluate the visual compatibility of the project with its surroundings included compliance with development code standards, consistency with applicable design guidelines, and an analysis of project-specific site design and architecture is related to the visual character of the area. Based on those different code definitions, scenic vistas potentially affected by the project consist of views of the hills to the north and west, as seen from adjoining public streets and sidewalks, namely Broadway and East MacArthur Street. So right now today, as shown in this slide, views of the hills to the west across the site through East MacArthur Street, let's go to that slide, are substantially obscured by existing buildings and vegetation. Consequently, construction of the project would not have a substantial impact on a scenic vista and would result in a less than significant impact. In terms of visual character, again, we look at development code consistency, consistency with applicable design guidelines, project-specific site planning and design. And so just to start with development code standards, as we just reviewed, the project fully complies with development code requirements regulating scale, massing, and height. With regard to guidelines, as set forth in the staff report, we compiled a table listing the city's guidelines for infill development in the historic zone, and that's discussed in the findings section of the staff report. That concludes that the project substantially complies with the design guidelines to development in the Broadway corridor. And some of the specific analysis that we address has to do with the development plan. It calls for, and it's quite clear in this slide, a two-story mixed-use building located at the southwest corner of the site. This is intended to serve as the visual anchor of the project. Along the Broadway frontage moving north, this building is followed by a common open space and two two-story fourplexes. This development pattern places the highest concentration of uses at the street corner, while creating a transition to lower intensity development to the north. The mixed-use building features a 16-foot setback along Broadway. The fourplexes are set back 18 feet. Pedestrian paths provide access throughout the site. Parking is placed behind buildings and screened from view. Along East MacArthur Street, which is another key factor in the evaluation of visual compatibility, this element of the project serves as a transition to the residential neighborhood to the east. At the southwest corner of the site, the mixed-use building presents its narrow face to East MacArthur Street, limiting its mass on that frontage. 3 detached residences, each with a height of approximately 25 feet, are placed on the frontage further to the east, creating a transition to lower density single-family development pattern characteristic of neighborhoods to the east of the project site. Each of these residences presents its narrow face to the street and features porches, entry walks, and low landscaping designed to engage the street. Setbacks between the buildings are a minimum of 16 feet, and the setback from East MacArthur Street is 16 feet. It was the conclusion of staff that this site plan creates an appropriate transition to the residential neighborhood to the east. As was requested, streetscapes have been prepared, and in staff's view, they support the analysis and conclusions of the initial study with respect to project aesthetics. And I would also point out that views from the interior of the site, walking down one of the interior drives within the site, under CEQA at least, there are no CEQA thresholds related to views from the interior of the project. And so they are not addressed in the initial study because they're not relevant to the CEQA thresholds. Moving on to the Broadway Street Historic District, that was established through a review initiated by Caltrans, I believe, in 2002. This district encompasses an area on Broadway, south of Patton Street and north of MacArthur Street. The area is shown on the map on the slide. The period of significance for this district is from 1880 to 1930. The proposed project is not located within the boundaries of the district, and staff would note that even though the car dealership building on the project site was constructed in 1925, which is within the period of significance for the district, the decision was made to exclude the subject property from its boundaries, as well as the adjoining Tillum mixed-use project. In addition, it's evident that the project would result in an improved visual transition to the district by removing the 6,000 square foot dealership building, which has a 0 setback on Broadway, and deteriorated unscreened paved parking areas, replacing them with a development that provides 3 buildings along the frontage, transitioning from smaller to larger, with setbacks ranging from 16 to 18 feet, along with associated landscaping, as it's shown on the streetscape. So, again, this is a CEQA issue. Now, staff has never and would never suggest that this project, or really any project, be approved on this site because it's better than what's there now. That bar is way too low, because what is on the site now is it's a visual blight. And, you know, that's not the standard that we use for project approval. But in terms of evaluating project impacts under CEQA, the current appearance of the site is very relevant because it represents the baseline condition. And in terms of these CEQA thresholds with respect to aesthetic impacts, the project is an improvement on the baseline condition in terms of the areas that CEQA addresses with respect to visual impacts. Another set of appeal issues relates to adequacy of parking and potential traffic impacts. Well, we've seen just through the different materials that have been presented on this appeal that there are apparently a number of ways to calculate parking for the project. I'm just going to focus on 2 of them. The first has to do with the parking requirements that are set forth in the development code. So for multifamily residential development, the parking ratio is 1.5 spaces per unit plus 25% guest parking. That implies that there's some unallocated parking for guests. The parking requirement for commercial is 1 parking space for 300 square feet of building area. So we have 33 multifamily residential units. Under our code, it doesn't matter how many bedrooms there are or how few bedrooms there are, it's the same parking ratio. And for the commercial component, there is 3,500 square feet of commercial area. So in terms of parking required, at the 1.5 per unit ratio, that represents between 33 and 50 allocated spaces. 25% guest parking represents 12 unallocated spaces. Commercial, based on the area of the commercial component, equals 12 spaces. So that suggests 74 parking spaces, including 24 unallocated spaces. Parking provided, we have 42 allocated spaces for the townhomes because they each have a 2-car garage. There are 12 allocated spaces for apartments and flats, 8 unallocated spaces that are in the form of just parking spaces that are located in various places on the property, including adjacent to the commercial building, and 2 apron spaces associated with one of the detached units. So those are spaces that one could park in, but they are in front of the garage for that particular unit. So that results in a total of 76 spaces, including 22 unallocated spaces and the 2 apron spaces. Another way to look at the parking requirements for this project is through state law. This project is not seeking a density bonus, but because of the inclusionary units that it is providing, it qualifies for one. As such, it also qualifies for consideration of a state parking standard. The state standard is based on number of bedrooms. So 0 to 1 bedroom, 1 on-site parking space. 2 to 3 bedrooms, 2 parking spaces. 4 and more, 2.5 parking spaces. State law doesn't address the commercial component, so that is simply the city's requirement. So under the state parking ratios, the requirement for the project would be 65 spaces for the residential component. Under the state code, it doesn't matter if those spaces are tandem, I would just add. So adding the 12 spaces that are required to the commercial requirement of the city, that results in a total requirement of 77 spaces. The parking provided under the approved site plan is 76, and the applicants in their submittal response to the appeal have shown that they can provide another 2 parking spaces, totaling 78. A traffic analysis was conducted as part of the environmental review of this project. The city retained a traffic consultant, W-Trans. They also performed the traffic analysis of the Altamira project south of this one that was reviewed by the City Council earlier this year. And I just wanted to say that with us today is a representative from the traffic consultant, Zach Madeley of W-Trans. He's just in the seating area, and he's available to answer any questions. But I just wanted to say very briefly that through the traffic analysis, we believe that the project would generate approximately 19 trips during the AM peak hour and 35 trips during the PM peak hour. Under current conditions, the level of service conditions at Broadway and MacArthur Street intersection would not change as a result of the traffic generated by the project. While under traffic conditions projected for the year 2040, the peak AM period would remain at LOSC, but the peak PM period would decline from LOSB to LOSC. The city and Caltrans both use level of service D as the lowest level of operation that is normally considered to be acceptable. And so based on these city standards, the traffic analysis concluded that the project would not have a significant impact on traffic conditions. The traffic analysis also looked at pedestrian safety issues. It looked at transit availability. It looked at safety concerns. It looked at a variety of issues, but I just wanted to focus on traffic as that was an issue raised in the appeal. I would also note that the traffic analysis that is part of the traffic analysis, even though it's not required under CEQA, we also asked the traffic engineers to study the shared parking that is proposed for the project, because it is intended that the commercial parking spaces and unallocated residential parking spaces associated with the project would be shared. And they performed that analysis, and that they concluded that the parking provided by the project under the shared parking model, which uses standard inputs with respect to how parking demand works with respect to multifamily residential and commercial, is adequate. And so that's not just a staff determination, that's a determination by an independent traffic engineer. The appellants have challenged the adequacy of the shared parking analysis that was prepared by the traffic engineer, but at least to my knowledge to date, they haven't actually cited any kinds of arguments or analysis that would contradict it. Another appeal issue has to do with different interpretations related to design guidelines, the mixed-use land use designation, the mixed-use zoning designation, and the regulations in the development code related to 3-story development. So, just to begin with, this project meets the setback requirement in the mixed-use zoning designation as applied to the Broadway corridor. That front yard and street side yard setback requirement is 15 feet. The project exceeds that requirement. So what's in dispute is not a requirement. It's a guideline. And there is an important distinction to be made between the requirements of the development code and the guidelines. The guideline in question has to do with infill development in the historic district, and it is all right here on the slide. Under this guideline, well, let's begin with its purpose. It talks about the compatibility of new infill development with, especially when considering larger structures. When new structures are developed adjacent to older single-family residences, there are concerns that the bulk and height of the infill structures may have a negative impact on adjoining smaller-scale structures. So right off the bat, at least in staff's view, there's a question of whether this guideline is even applicable to this project, because it does not actually adjoin any older single-family residences. It adjoins a mixed-use building with an area of greater than 5,000 square feet on Broadway, and it adjoins a duplex on East MacArthur Street. That said, if one wants to apply the guideline to the project, it begins, new development should continue the functional on-site relationships of the surrounding neighborhood. For example, common patterns that should be continued are entries facing the public right-of-way, front porches, and garages and parking areas located at the rear of the parcel. Well, this project complies completely with that guideline. All of the residences adjoining Broadway and MacArthur Street engage the street functionally and in terms of their design. They have front doors facing the street. They have porches facing the street. All garages and parking areas are located in the interior of the property. The next section of that site plan consideration guideline has to do with the front setbacks for infill development. And it states that new infill development should follow either one of the following criteria: equal to the average front setback of all residences on both sides of the street within 100 feet of the property line of the new project, or equal to the average front setback of the two immediately adjoining structures on each side of the new project. Well, again, we run into an issue of applicability, because there aren't actually any residences within 100, there aren't any single-family residences within 100 feet of the property lines of this project. We do have the duplex, and we do have the mixed-use development, which does include a residential component. MacArthur project, which is to the east, doesn't actually adjoin because it's across MacArthur Street. So if one were to think of MacArthur Street and the Tillman mixed-use project as the adjoining structures, then you would end up with a setback requirement of at least 50 feet, because the MacArthur Place project was developed with its parking towards the front. It's very well landscaped. It doesn't have any issue with respect to the street, but as a hotel project, it's inward looking, and it's organized as such. So in staff's view, it would not make sense to apply that kind of setback requirement to this site. Guidelines in the development code, as stated in the staff report, are suggestive. They do play a role in the discretionary review, and that the failure of a project to comply with guidelines may be used by the decision-making authority as a basis for denial. And to approve a project that fails to comply with applicable guidelines, the authority must find substantial reasons exist to justify the non-compliance. So, again, the project doesn't adjoin any older single-family structures. Along Broadway, there are no single-family residences within 100 feet of the site. MacArthur Place is not immediately adjoining. Setback averaging could result in a setback of 60 feet or more. And because the Broadway corridor design guidelines encourage buildings to engage with the street and discourage placing parking in the front, it would be inconsistent to apply a setback that arises from a site plan approval, and I'm referring here to MacArthur Place, that does not comply with the Broadway corridor design guidelines. Another issue raised in the appeal is the question of whether townhomes can be approved at all in this project. So that's an issue of general plan consistency and development code consistency. So here we are beginning with the general plan and the definition of the mixed-use land use designation. So again, accommodate uses that provide a transition between commercial and residential districts, provide neighborhood commercial services to adjacent residential areas, provide additional opportunities for affordable housing. This project provides a transition between commercial uses on Broadway and the low-density residential neighborhoods to the east. It includes an affordable housing component of 8 units. Although the project would not retain any element of the former auto sales and repair uses, those are not considered to contribute to the character or function of the neighborhood. The project is primarily residential, but it also includes a commercial component that's intended to provide opportunities for uses that would serve residents of the project and nearby residential neighbors. It's within the density allowance of the mixed-use land use designation. Let's look at the zoning definition. Allow, again, for higher density housing types such as apartments and condominiums, both separately and in conjunction with commercial and office development. So here we have a reference to specific uses, apartments and condominiums. Those are listed as examples of high density housing types, but the definition language does not limit the development to those 2 types. Here we have the allowances in the development code for the specific uses that are allowed in the mixed use zone. Uses allowed: multifamily dwellings of 5 or more units, single family dwellings, in case that there is concern that these detached townhomes actually constitute single family structures. If you want to consider them that way, they can still be allowed, subject to use permit review. So what's a multifamily dwelling? Triplexes, fourplexes, townhouse development, 3 or more attached single-family dwellings where no unit is located above another unit, and senior citizen multifamily housing. So this definition makes specific reference to townhomes, and it seems clear to staff anyway that townhomes are allowed, subject to use permit review, in the mixed-use zone. The appellants talk a lot about the history of the development code and of the 2020 general plan. So let's go back in time a little bit. This project was approved before the adoption of the development code in 2002. This is a site within the Broadway corridor. It's a planned unit development. It includes a range of unit sizes, the smallest at 1,200 square feet, the largest at 1,536 square feet. These are townhomes in a planned unit development with a range of unit sizes that is very consistent with the unit sizes in the proposed project. All right, well, that's prior to the adoption of the development code. So what? Here is the second phase of that project that was approved in I believe December of 2003. The development code was adopted in February of 2003. So the same planning commission that approved the development code approved this project. All of these are 3-bedroom units, townhome style. 2 of the units are detached. Again, the unit sizes are comparable to those of the townhomes in the Gateway project, although obviously neither of these projects included an apartment component or flats. Okay, well, what if the mixed-use definition in the 1995 general plan, which was still in effect in 2003, was a lot different than the mixed-use definition in the 2020 general plan? Well, that is a good question, but they are virtually identical. So just based on the development code as written, and based on the history of approvals of the development code in the Broadway corridor, it seems very clear that the unit types that are proposed in this project have been allowed and are allowed, subject to use permit review. Moving on to the issue of height, the appellants assert that only projects that have layer of residential units above 2 floors of commercial qualify for a 36-foot height limit. And there are structures in this project that exceed 30 feet, as approved by the Planning Commission. All of them are in the interior of the site, but nonetheless they do exceed 30 feet. Well, here's the development code section in question. A maximum height of 36 feet may be allowed in order to accommodate third-floor multifamily residential development. The allowance of this additional height shall be subject to use permit review in compliance with the applicable section of the development code. So there's no reference to a required commercial layer in this language. But to the extent that it's subject to interpretation, I think that it's useful to look at the general plan. This table is from the 2017-2023 housing element. It's a table that summarizes development standards in terms of how they apply to residential development. And in part, it's intended to demonstrate to HCD that the city can actually meet its regional housing allocation. In the mixed-use zone, we see up to 20 units per acre. We see variable setback requirements, lot coverage of up 70 to 100%, and FAR of 0.6 to 1.2, and we see a maximum height of 36 feet, 3 stories. So those are the main appeal issues that I wanted to address in this presentation. There are other appeal issues that have been raised. We've tried to address them in the staff report, and I'm happy to try to answer questions about issues that I didn't cover. But I think that it's important to just kind of move on so that the public and the City Council can weigh in on this item. So just next, I'd like to quickly just note that the applicant has suggested, through the appeal process, their own revisions. They're proposing, or they've submitted at least as an option, a site plan that would increase average setbacks on Broadway and MacArthur, increase the number of parking spaces adjoining the 2 apartment structures, and they provided an option for a different architectural building style for some or all of the interior townhomes. And in staff's view, these are relatively minor changes that would not substantially modify the project as approved by the Planning Commission, and they're the kinds of revisions that might typically be made in the course of design review. So here's that updated site plan with the additional units behind the apartment buildings. There is no exceedance in coverage, by the way, in this site plan. It still meets the requirement. And this is the architectural option for the interior units. Some additional context that we wanted to note, because of the residential component associated with this project, even though it's a mixed-use development, it does fall within certain parameters that are set forth by the state with respect to how the council can act and limitations on action with respect to making changes to a project that would deny it or reduce its density. These aren't necessarily clear-cut limitations, and it's important to look at different issues step by step with staff and our city attorney to make sure that we're not either running afoul of the Housing Accountability Act or overly restricting the authority of the City Council, because the City Council, and I do want to emphasize this, does have a lot of authority over this project. But at the same time, we just need to be cognizant of different kinds of limitations under the state law with respect to housing projects. I also wanted to just note that one of the issues that the appellants stress has to do with their view that the project is overly autocentric, and they will be presenting different materials to support that idea, including visual simulations showing what it might be like to drive into and through this project. And it's absolutely true that someone living in one of these units, when they go to work, they'll get into their car, they'll leave their garage or their allocated parking space, and they'll go to work. And when they come home, they'll come back to project driveways and park in their garage. But what's also true is that people living in this project can walk out their front door and go over to MacArthur Place for dinner. They can walk out their front door and they can go to the farmer's market on a Tuesday night. Sonoma doesn't have mass transit. We do need to accommodate the automobile. We've got guidelines that require the parking to be screened from view. We have guidelines that suggest that we limit the number of driveway cuts on Broadway and East MacArthur Street. And that does result in an organization of the project that is similar to what you have in front of you. And that's not to say that there can't be other organizations, but there are constraints on this site and on any project that might be proposed for this site. And in staff's view, this project finds a balance between pedestrian engagement with Broadway and East MacArthur Street and adequately accommodating vehicle needs. I also wanted to put this project in context in terms of the unit sizes that are proposed. So this chart shows projects in process, including some projects that have been approved and other projects that are still in the approval process. So right now, today, the largest group in terms of these size categories is between 750 square feet and 1,250 square feet. And that is a group that's not addressed by this project. This project addresses unit sizes that are smaller and unit sizes that are somewhat larger, but that do not exceed 2,000 square feet. And I think that it is important to have this context because Sonoma has a diversity of housing needs. No one project is going to fulfill all of those needs. And at least in staff's view, having a certain number of townhomes that are 3 or 4 bedroom townhomes isn't a bad thing. And it's not something that really any other project is providing at all. So we don't have a glut of units of this type in the pipeline. I would just like to emphasize that. And this project provides many other unit types as well, and also a large component of units that are 2-bedroom units. So I'd like to just wrap up by stating again that this site has been the subject of many, many different reviews by the Planning Commission spanning a number of different project concepts. And through those reviews, at least from the perspective of staff, we got the following key directions. Emphasize residential, but include a commercial component. Keep to a 30-foot height limit or less on street frontages. Place taller buildings in the interior of the site. Keep parking areas screened by buildings and off of the street frontages. Emphasize pedestrian elements and connections. Focus on smaller unit sizes. Provide a diversity of unit types. This project does all of those things. So just to sum up, staff recommends that the City Council direct staff to prepare resolutions denying the appeal and adopting the mitigated negative declaration and approving the tentative map and use permit for consideration at a subsequent meeting scheduled for a date certain. Thank you.
So, Madam Mayor and members of the City Council, if I can just remind you of where we are on appeals in accordance with the city's ordinance. The City Council is hearing this appeal in accordance with our appeal ordinance contained within the Development Code, which provides that the City Council conducts this hearing de novo, which means you are sitting and hearing it as if you are hearing it for the first time anew. Requires the council to take an action relative to that, but you can take an action based on any information, whether that information is actually contained within the appeal or whether it's information brought up by the council itself, members of the public, etc. So you have the full plethora of options that are at least legally available to you as part of this appeal hearing.
Thank you. And at this point, do we have any questions for council or from the staff? None? Is there anything else? Okay, I think we have 3 minutes to receive public comments. Is that right?
Well, just to review the appeal process once again, what's next will be an appellant presentation. That's going to be limited to 20 minutes, followed by council questions. The applicant will then have a response period of up to 20 minutes, again, an opportunity for council questions, and then public comment thereafter would be limited to 3 minutes.
Thank you for reminding me. So who shall we call up? The appellant?
Good evening, Mayor, members of the council. Before I begin, I'd like to actually state that in 1998 or 1988, I joined this community as well, and have shared 33 years of planning experience with David Goodison. And quite honestly, I hope it has. And quite honestly, this is a unenjoyable event for the last meeting in this chamber with David. However, good evening, Mayor Agramani and the council members. My name is Bill Willers. I live at 873 First Street West. As the appellants for this project, Victor Conforti and I have a combined experience of 75 years in this community as architects. We seek adherence to the proper review and processing of projects in our community. And one or both of us have been appointed to planning task force committees, Sonoma Citizens Advisory Commission, Sonoma Planning Commission, and have continually participated in this community in discussions related to planning of our community over the last 30 years. We were participants in the formation of the City of Sonoma's current general plan, members of the task force that ultimately formed the city's current development code, and have participated in every housing element, every update of every housing elements in that period of time. Under CEQA, we are considered experts, being architects and being engaged in planning efforts in our community. I know that you received a letter saying that there was no factual basis from the attorney of the applicant on the part of our appeal. The fact of the matter is that as experts in this community and as participants in this community process, we actually probably have a better understanding of the process of planning in our community than the attorney that wrote that letter. We also have advocated continually for higher densities and solutions to our housing needs. We've worked to include them in the new zoning, what was then the new zoning regulation of mixed use in our development code, argued for increasing densities in the zoning designation, and so to provide affordable forms of housing, have supported many higher density and affordable housing projects that met the goals and aspirations of our community as expressed in the general plan and development code. However, not every project rises to the high standard of compatibility that we and many others who live here and visit here value in our community. Victor and I have appealed the approval of the Sonoma Gateway project to you because we believe that the review process of this project was flawed. And it has resulted in an approval of a project that does not satisfy, one, the requirements of the California Environmental Quality Act, but also does not conform with our general plan and development code. On Friday, you received from our attorney, Christine Lawson, a submitted letter to supplement our appeal that describes the deficiencies in the initial study and the mitigated negative declaration in more detail. These deficiencies stem from the fact that the initial study, mitigated negative dec, bases its conclusion no impact or less than significant impact, either on erroneous assumptions or no analysis whatsoever. Who's Christina Lawson? Christine specializes in land use, environmental, and municipal matters. Her clients ask for interpretations of general plans, specific plans, zoning ordinances, subdivision map acts, and CEQA. She's considered a respected authority on the California Environmental Quality Act and its compliance. Christina represents clients locally in the state and federal administration and judicial proceedings throughout California. She's also a former city council member and mayor of the city of Walnut Creek. So she understands what you're having to deal with today as well. She's worked with our city attorney on matters over the last 5 years of planning and appeals like this as well. So she certainly has standing in terms of her interpretation of CEQA and her letter to you, is recognized, or was recognized in 2014 in the Daily Journal as one of the top 20 under 40 lawyers in California. In her letter, she states further that the city cannot rely on the initial study of mitigated negative deck and may not lawfully proceed with the approval of this project because of that. We agree, and we have stated such during the Planning Commission hearings of this project. And during the Planning Commission hearings, I raised concerns that the Planning Commission did not have adequate information to perform or evaluate the review of the impact of this project on the Broadway Historic District. What you've been shown tonight are elevations from Broadway and from MacArthur, showing only the buildings that are in front of this project, that front the streets. You were not shown in those descriptions, nor was the Planning Commission, the 3-story buildings that lie behind them. That 3-story massing is visible from MacArthur and from Broadway, and it has an impact on the historic district that is the Broadway Historic District. And under CEQA, that cultural resource requires a review of a project that may have potential impact upon it. That review was not done, even though it was requested not only by myself, but by members of the Planning Commission. When the Planning Commissioners, in the transcript that we provided you, it's clear what the Planning Commissioners were asking for in context was a visual assessment of this entire project, not just the buildings in front, but of the entire project on the impact of the Broadway corridor. What they were hoping to understand are the critical elements of a planning decision, and that is scale, massing, and proportion. Not materials, not style, but the physical reality of a building in the context of its setting. And CEQA requires that analysis for a complete document and a review of a project. The project that we are appealing is at a prominent location in our community. The project site borders the unofficial gateway to the Broadway Historic District and the Plaza National Historic District. Any project proposed at this location requires careful and thorough review, not only for the checking of boxes that are required by an application, but also for its impact and compatibility of those important historic qualities of our city. It is possible for an application to be filed in this that meets all of the requirements and to be incompatible with the community and the site that it's being placed on and the district surrounding it. And our premise is that this project is incompatible through its massing and its proportion and its scale. It is out of scale with the district of Broadway. While the building that is to the north of this project is not currently a single-family residence, in 1914 it was built as a single-family residence. In 1997 it was remodeled into a mixed-use building, but it was remodeled in that way in adherence to the Secretary of Interior standards, which require an analysis as a historic resource, and it requires careful consideration of that resource and its addition in form of scale, massing, and proportion. This project should be required to conform equally. As I stated in my public testimony, the process being utilized by the city does not conform to CEQA. It requires cities and counties to follow protocol of analysis and publicly disclose potential environmental impacts of a proposed project and adopt feasible measures to mitigate those impacts. The impacts that were presented to the Planning Commission by myself were those visual impacts. And as an expert, I don't have to prove that. I don't have to prove that to the Planning Commission. I don't even have to really provide the facts other than my opinion in that case for it to be considered the possibility of a significant impact. CEQA requires the process to evaluate and provide the Planning Commission with information to make a proper decision, and if necessary, to mitigate those impacts. for example, in the staff report, the subject of compatibility comes up, and as a method of mitigating that, it suggests that windows, doors, and porches on these buildings mitigate the fact that there may be potential impacts. Well, every building has windows, porches, and doors, but not every building has the scale and massing and proportion of the buildings that are in the center of this project. In fact, I would suggest that nothing on Broadway has this kind of scale until you get to the commercial district, and certainly not at this end of it, because most of those buildings in the historic districts district were residential buildings. They were homes. They were the larger homes of our community at the time that they were built, and they've slowly converted into commercial use. Question of the Housing Affordability Act is the elephant in the room. But the approval of a project cannot be predetermined, and assuming the project may take advantage of certain housing laws and make it easier to justify approval or more difficult to justify disapproval, the requirements of CEQA cannot be circumvented. A proper environmental review must be completed before those housing laws can be invoked. And there's case law that supports that. For example, the Housing Accountability Act itself specifically states, paraphrasing, that this section cannot relieve the local agency from complying with the California Environmental Quality Act. Even setting aside the CEQA issues, one of the issues was related to the third story element and the three, what we consider to be a height exception of that 36 feet. While the development code allows for the 36 feet to be granted via an exception process by the Planning Commission, that exception process must follow exactly the same exception process that all other exceptions follow here. And that is that it must be filed and considered and the findings made to allow it. The other issue that comes up in the third floor discussion is that the third floors are not above, in these conditions, are not above a mixed use situation. They are the third floors of essentially single family houses. And they are not third floor units as are described in the allowance for that third floor exception to height. At this point, what I'd like to do while Victor comes up is I'd like to run the video. I think the video is self-explanatory. I believe that it clearly shows the impact on the historic district and the scale and massing of this building. It is accurately drawn. It's what I do as a profession every day in and out, and I use the documents that were provided by the public to make the model and to put this video together. And Victor will come up and make a few comments after this.
Yes, before I begin, if you could stop the clock, please. I would just like to thank David for many, many years of working together. I came to this community in 1972, so was working with many or several of the planning directors before David, and David is by far the most thorough and the most complete and skilled planner who I've ever worked with. So,
but apparently it's a low bar. Truly, Vic, I appreciate it. Thank you.
We go back quite a ways. So I guess starting the clock again. I guess I don't know. We got I just wanted to touch on a couple of the sort of numerical, I guess, or objective issues as opposed to things that might be more subjective. However, unfortunately, the most important issue I feel is the visual analysis of the project. And again, as a licensed architect, I have the skills to make that sort of evaluation. I also designed the building right next to this project, just to the north, the additions and use of the little historic home there, and was careful to keep the additions one story. There's a one-story existing building. The additions are one story, and the two-story portions are set well back. So when you're looking at the photograph Dave showed on the earlier staff report, you really have a hard time seeing the second floor taller building at the rear. That sort of attitude, you can see this, it's a red building that's coming up there. You really can't see the two-story building in the back. The character of Broadway, my office is on Broadway up the street, across the way. And as you know, the scale and feel of it is far different than a project like this. And I do realize that with a commercial component, you do have to have a larger building, but this being, that corner is so critical, being on the entrance to the part of Broadway which widens and which acts as a clear grand entrance to the plaza, which of course is the most important feature in town. That this project really has to meet a very high standard, and I feel that that corner building is too tall, is too imposing, and part of that is the setback issue. But it's just a case of scale and massing, that is really the critical thing here. The setback issue, using averaging of adjacent buildings, or averaging of the term, I guess, in the code included the word residence. That little building wasn't altered; it was reconditioned, so it's visually in its form a unaltered little residence that existed in 1914. But more so than dealing with the technicality of the word residence, the purpose of this is for these infill projects, is to fit into the neighborhood, and in this case a historic overlay that we have in our development code, plus the state designation as the Broadway Street Historic District, which is a couple or maybe 100 feet north of this property. That district is actually creating a link to the plaza. And that's why the state took the effort to create this district, to analyze every building up and down in that district. And this is the front door, these two corners that bring you into town and bring you to the plaza, so that the district has a huge influence over this project, even though the project isn't in this district. It does connect visually, and you see quite a distance when you're crossing MacArthur as you approach the wide part of Broadway. The other issues regarding height and the third story question are more of a development code that I've worked with over the years, I guess, let's put it that way. I've done probably a dozen mixed-use buildings in town, and they're much smaller, not the scale of this, but the basic premise was residential above something that would either be commercial or office or another different use. And probably the largest building that we added a third floor of residential was the Lynch building, which is just down next to the Index Tribune building. And this ordinance just came into being when Dave suggested to me and Bill Lynch, you have the right to put a third floor on here. So we did just that, and there are seven small units up there that are studios and a couple of one-bedroom units. So just coming from this background and seeing many, other people doing the same kind of thing, the intent of the code, the development code, is not townhouses. It was, and there's nothing that clear about that except the concept of a lower density. Townhouses are lower density, clearly, than flats and apartments and condominiums, as is used, the terms used in the code. But just the effect of townhouses aren't in the spirit of the mixed-use zone, nor in the application of higher density housing. And I think with 18 seconds left, about the last point I could make would be that I think this should be a housing project, should have higher density, and I think they're close, but I think they need to come back with a little better project. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Conforti. And now I believe at this time we will be calling up the applicant.
Good evening, Madam Mayor, council members. Let me find my discussion here. My name is Scott Hunter. I live at 625 First Street West here in Sonoma. I'm also a partner in Broadway and MacArthur LLC, which is the development entity for this project. We've got our whole team here tonight. Scattered throughout the audience behind me is Barry McCormick, who is the managing member of our LLC, Jeff McCormick, who is president of Vesta Pacific Development, who has done all the land planning and will be the contractor on the project, Bill Walters, who is the managing partner of the limited partnership that currently owns the site that we will buy as soon as the approval process is over. Casey McDonald, with an engineer with Adobe Engineering. Laura Solomon, who is an architect with Vandertulen Landscape Architecture. And Alex Merritt, who is with Shepherd Mullen Law Firm. And I need to tell you that we normally would not come to a community meeting like this with an attorney, but late Friday, 4:30, 5 o'clock, the appellants dropped a what I call lawyer letter on us, and Alex is a land use expert and a CEQA expert, and is here to discuss his rebuttal, which you have in front of you. It's a comprehensive point-by-point rebuttal of the attorneys that the attorney letter from the appellants. Before I get started, I'd like to read a statement just about our philosophy and the way we've gone about this process from day one. Before we entered into a contract to purchase this site, we looked very carefully at the general plan and concluded that it was designed to encourage the development of this property. The general plan's intent was to preserve the outlying agricultural properties, but to develop the urban core. The general plan dictates very specific parameters, and over the course of the last 1.5 years, our effort has been with the general plan in mind to carefully tailor a complementary design. Throughout this process, we have worked very closely with the planning department to accomplish this goal. So that's our sort of our overall philosophy with this project. The staff report, as usual, was comprehensive and full of fact and what has gone into us being here tonight. And at the risk of repeating something that you've already heard, I am going to touch on a few things that David did mention. But before I get to that, I guess this is sort of a dubious honor, but I guess we are the recipients of David Goodison's last staff report. And for that, I guess...
His swan song, I think we called it.
Yes, yes, indeed. And I guess for that, we are thankful. Thank you, David.
I'm sure you and many others.
Okay. So just to begin with, David touched on some of the important dates, and I'd like to expand on that. We first found this site, identified the site in early 2017. We entered into a contract to purchase it January or February of 2017. By March, we had a preliminary design, and that was with some consultation with the planning department at that point. And then we modified that somewhat, and in June, we appeared before the Staff Advisory Committee, which, as you probably know, is made up of representatives from each department within the city, and it's done pre-application so that we can avoid any train wrecks a little further down the road. The Staff Advisory Committee had a lot of input for us, and we incorporated all of their comments into the plan that we then took to a community meeting at MacArthur Park in August of 2017. It was a good meeting. It was very well attended. We had close to 70 people there, a lively discussion, opinions of all sorts were aired, and we made a lot of notes. One of the appellants, Mr. Willers, was particularly outspoken at the meeting, and because of that, I wanted to find out more, so I made an appointment with him to sit down and talk about our project and what his suggestions might be. I was hoping for a collaboration, but instead received a continued critique of what we had presented. Regardless, we went ahead about a week or so later to our first session with the Planning Commission. That was in September. And as David has already said, this was characterized as a planning session, and we took the input we got from that Planning Commission meeting, along with the input that we had gotten from the community meeting, and decided that based on that input, a major redesign of the project was necessary. And so we went ahead and did that. We weren't able to get back on the Planning Commission agenda until March of this year, and we appeared there. We had a hearing. It was continued because of the issue David mentioned earlier, but we got additional input, which we incorporated into the plan that we then presented to the Planning Commission in May. And in May, the project was approved by a supermajority, 5-2, of the Planning Commission. I'd like to take a moment to highlight some of the things that this project delivers to our city. First of all, it removes a blighted eyesore that's been there close to 10 years. It provides needed housing, both market and affordable. We've provided 24% of our units are affordable. We're only required to provide 20% of our units. Half of our units will be rented 10% below the required limit. It offers variety, both in type of housing, in architectural style, and in size. The townhomes have 4 different sizes. We have 2-bedroom flats, we have single-family residences, and we have apartments. We provide a retail space for between 1 to 3 tenants that we hope will be local businesses. It's the retail area is surrounded by a large veranda, covered veranda, that will have Adirondack chairs and that sort of thing on to encourage people to linger. And our tenants, we hope to provide services, food, and other services that are not available on the east side at this point, so that they will be stores that not only will service the people who live within the development, but also others in their east side neighborhood. The project, as David has gone through, exceeds the parking requirement. We have asked for nor received no variances. We have, and I hate to use a phrase that was just used in the previous discussion, but we've checked all the boxes in the development code, including on density. We could have 37 units. We have 33. Our FAR can be as high as 1. We are at 0.87. Open space, we've exceeded it by several thousand feet. Site coverage, under the strictest definition, we come in at 57.9%. We could be as high as 60. And setbacks, we meet all the setbacks all the way around. This project is eclectically designed. It's fully landscaped. The idea is to engage the passersby and enhance the pedestrian experience. This is a true mixed-use project as envisioned by the general plan. And yet, 15 days at the 11th hour after this exhaustive community process and a supermajority vote of approval by the Planning Commission, our project was appealed, which of course is why we're here tonight. Now, I've met with each of you, some of you during the last year and a half, and all of you just before this appeal hearing to answer any questions you might have. And you have before you our detailed written response rebutting each and every point raised in the appellant's appeal. Shepard Mullen has also provided you with a detailed point-by-point rebuttal to the last-minute letter from the appellant's counsel. You also have before you a letter of rebuttal from Janine Origer, who is our historical resource expert regarding the cultural resource portion of the appellant's attorney's letter. Over the weekend, the council and our group received an unsolicited written communication from Owen Smith. Owen Smith worked for a hotel development company that was in contract to purchase our development site. In 2013, this hotel company hired one of the appellants, Mr. Conforti, to develop preliminary plans for a hotel on the site. And as you have seen, because Mr. Smith also included the site plan or the preliminary plan, as you have seen, the resulting plan was an 81,000 square foot, 3-story hotel on the corner of Broadway and MacArthur with a massive parking lot over the rest of the site. And according to Mr. Smith, Mr. Conforti suggested that some version of that design would be doable on the site. Our plan is roughly half as large, and it really makes me wonder what we're doing here tonight. In closing, there is no question that the items raised in the appeal are simply not supported by the facts. The appeal is without merit, and I respectfully request that you vote to deny it. All of our team is here to answer questions, and we can use the rest of our time to do that if you would like.
You still have 8 minutes left.
I understand that. I pretty much said what I need to say.
Oh.
And so we have all of our experts back here. If you'd like to check a point of law, our attorney is here. If you want to talk about engineering, our engineer is here.
Does anyone from the city council have any questions? None?
I have a question.
All right.
Oh, I'd just like to hear from your counsel. Mr. Willers said that he can be deemed an expert because of his professional qualifications and participation in civic life, if you will. And your attorney's letter pretty extensively alleges that they have not provided any expert testimony. So I'd like
Correct.
to hear from your attorney.
Procedurally, do I leave and not come back, and then our attorney comes up, and if we still have time, if they're, Madam Mayor?
Yes.
Okay. All right. I'm here if you want me, though.
Good evening, Alex Merritt from the Shepherd Mullen Law Firm. We're counsel for the developer. Sure. So I guess 2 quick points. One, the point we're making in the letter is that Hanson Bridget, the lawyers, are not experts on technical environmental subjects like traffic. The appellants are architects, so they may have expertise on design and architecture, but they're also not experts on the other technical subjects like traffic, historic resources, cumulative environmental impacts, and so forth.
Thank you very much. We still have 7 minutes left, and would you suggest I take public comments and allow more time, those 7 minutes, or what?
No, I think at this point, what we allowed each of the appellant and the applicant each had a 20-minute max. And so if the applicant is done with their time at this point, then we would move on to council questions and/or public comment. And based on the evening, I think obviously we want to get to public comment as soon as we can.
Yeah.
So it's a pleasure of the council.
Okay. Any questions at this point? None? Could we take a 5-minute break? Sorry. I'd like to open the public session. So you certainly can queue up in the behind the podium, and we're here interested in getting public comment.
Ready?
Yes, thank you.
Hi, my name is Charlotte Ruffner. I live at 649 First Street West. And first I'd like to say Mr. Goodison did a fantastic job explaining how the project meets all the requirements with respect to parking, traffic, setback, height requirements. It was a real education, CEQA, and so on. A couple things. I live in a 3-story townhouse on First Street West in the Carneros Village Lofts. And I'm probably one of the few people who walked here today, and I completely agree that because of where I live, I mean, I bought it specifically because it's so close to the plaza and walking distance to restaurants. I hardly ever use my car. My husband and I share one car. I truly believe what Mr. Goodison said about the traffic impact. That's just my opinion. Let's see, I also want to say that it will be a welcome relief to see anything built there. But the project that's planned, I love. I think it's really great looking. I would definitely consider even moving from where I live into one of the units there. It looks spectacular to me. And I just would like to say I fully support the project, and I hope this council denies the appeal. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Hello, my name is Christine Batten. I live at 843 Austin Avenue, and I wrote a letter to each of you. I hope you all got that and read that. I won't reiterate everything that I said in the letter, but I wanted to let you know that it's always been kind of a surprise to me that the only photographs or pictures that we saw from the applicant were the pictures right along Broadway and right along MacArthur. But those of us who live on Austin Avenue are going to be looking at the other side of this project. And the mass of those 3-story buildings that comprise the townhomes is what we will be looking at. And it's very concerning to me because in the winter, when all the deciduous trees lose their leaves, we're going to be looking right into those buildings. And I'm also concerned about how many trees they're removing. So many mature trees on that property are going to be removed. So, you know, I have concerns about parking because our block is already impacted by MacArthur Place. And I fear that although they have proposed that they have adequate parking, it seems to me that they probably do not, and that we're probably going to be impacted by this development as well. And the other thing that I wrote in my my letter was having to do with the conspicuous nature of the affordable units not really blending in with this community at all, but sort of being, you know, put out there by themselves in a dormitory-like situation that I just don't think is right. So those are my thoughts, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Batten.
Veronica Nablus, 18092 Gregor Street. Thank you, Mr. Goodison, for all your wonderful years of service, and also for the explanation on how you came up with this project, or how the considerations. I'm surprised as someone who's built buildings, I have an architectural background, that this is being appealed. It has reduced the unit size, they've reduced the unit size, they've met the development code compliances with no variances needed. It meets FAR, it meets the setback requirements, the open space allotment is exceeded, the parking requirements are also met and exceeded, the traffic analysis was conducted with a very low LOS of D. As far as I can tell, the appeal is being based on semantics and aesthetics that have, as far as I can see, no basis in reality. The project is visually pleasing, and indeed the bar is currently set quite low. But having a blighted building eliminated and approved, having a project approved that is in compliance, will provide visitors and Sonoma residents alike with an aesthetic representation of what the city of Sonoma is like. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Good evening. I'm Susan Fagan. I live at 78. My name is Susan Fagan. I live at 782 Donner Avenue. Along with my husband, Len Tillum, I own the mixed-use building to the north of the project. I'm not in love with the mass of the buildings next door, but that's, at this stage, everybody has already talked about that. I have a parking concern that has to do with the mixed use, with the commercial part of it, which the parking for that is around the back, actually inside the development, which means you have to go down MacArthur Street, go in, drive right through the whole development to get to those parking spots. I suspect that if it's any kind of retail, you will have people using Broadway in front there. I don't know we don't know yet what the tenants will be, but I do know, I've seen the experience they've had at Pete's and at the post office and other places with the parking, the overflow parking. I suspect that in front of our building and possibly even, I don't know what people will be using, but it certainly will impact that. And I gather, I didn't know this at the time because I missed the early deliberations on this. I gather there was once an entrance from Broadway, which was eliminated. And of course, had I been more on the ball, I should have seen that and asked for it to be kept. But it just does seem to me that one other entrance would make, if you are making any changes to this, would be desirable, just to allow the people to get to the parking at the back of the commercial building. And thank you. That's all I have to say.
Thank you, Ms. Fagan.
I'm Valerie Woods. I live at 969 Country Club Lane in Sonoma. I just wanted to say that living here over the last 4 years and actually previously before, I have always felt as I drove into Sonoma that that area of Broadway was really desolate feeling and didn't keep with the charm of the city itself. I feel the project that's proposed does do so, and it also is in keeping with many of the newer projects that are popping up around town. And I think that the look of it is pleasing, and that the visitors coming in are going to feel as though they are entering into a more lovely zone rather than waiting several blocks up the road to start to feel the charm of Sonoma. So I appreciate so much this project, and I do hope that the council will deny the appeal. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Wilson.
Good evening, Mayor Agramonte and City Council members. My name is Carol Marcus, 873 1st Street West, and I would first like to thank David Goodison for his many years of service to this community and to wish him well. The project before you is on one of the last remaining large mixed-use zone sites in Sonoma. It is one of the few remaining opportunities to create the type of housing that is spelled out in the mixed-use zone. Bill Willers and Victor Conforti were active participants many years ago in the creation of the mixed-use zone in order to better utilize land for housing in the urban core, and they know its intent full well. Its intent is very clearly spelled out in the development code. What you have before you is a suburban solution to housing, in that each family can drive up to and into their unit. It was this decision by the developer to create such housing, which accounts for the inordinate amount of land area dedicated to driveways, and results in the taller buildings on the site than are allowed without an exception. And I want to emphasize here that these proposed heights require exceptions. They are not allowances, as has been posited in the staff report. But this is not a suburban lot. In fact, it's as urban a lot as you'll find in Sonoma. But more importantly, it's an opportunity to create a neighborhood where neighbors engage each other. A wall of garage doors among buildings in this development hardly creates a neighborhood and is anomalous to, and therefore incompatible with, development in Sonoma. The aesthetic impacts were not sufficiently analyzed during the Planning Commission meetings. I resent the accusation in one of the letters by a proponent of the project that our opposition to the project derives from NIMBYism. We are not looking for a less densely designed project. On the contrary, with the type of housing that this site is zoned for, we fully expect as dense a project, perhaps even more so. We envision a development intended by Sonoma's development code, where there is a mixture of smaller unit types, affordable to not just 1 or 2 people living in 486 square feet, but to families as well, where modest housing is inclusionary, not exclusionary. This is doable. There is precedent for this in Sonoma. Sonoma is already on a trajectory to becoming a monoculture, a place where only the wealthy can live and where tourists love to visit. The recent closure of the OB unit at the Sonoma Valley Hospital means you can't even be born here anymore. Is this really what we want for the future of Sonoma? To drive families out? Is this sustainable? As in nature, monocultures seldom are. Where is the vision outlined in our 2020 general plan that ours is a diverse community where residents and their children can and want to remain, where housing is available and affordable to the residents and the local workforce to support an economically diverse population?
Thank you, Ms. Marquez.
You are the stewards of, one more sentence. You are the stewards of the vision in Sonoma stated in our general plan. Let's not lose this opportunity to help create a more sustainable Sonoma.
Thank you.
Please pay attention to the development code and the general plan. Thank you.
Again, Lynn Joyner, and I live at 254 West MacArthur. And I just want to commend everybody in this room for hanging in here. I don't believe you guys do this all the time. I don't attend that many city council meetings, and man, you got to stretch more. That's all I can say. But I don't want to use up my time that way. I want to say that I looked very forward when I went to the meeting last year at Saddles Restaurant when the developer came to bring the plans. And I've been very disappointed, and I think you can do better. I really do. And I want all of us to do